Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Glory to you, O Lord. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain. And after he sat down, the disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad. For your reward is great in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. Grace and peace to you on this day from God our Father and our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. What does it mean to be blessed? I think as people who live in America, we have an idea of what we think blessing is. I would articulate that it's really one word. Access. That you're blessed somehow if you have access to the ideals of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what we would say. Or we would be blessed if we had access to long life and prosperity. Not that all of us are going to live to be 100 or retire millionaires. We know that's not going to happen. But that there would be opportunity for that. That would be a blessing. Or we could say that a blessing we have that is really far different than the way most people have lived throughout human history is we actually have something called the freedom of speech. We have the freedom of the press. We have the right to assemble, which is really kind of a novel idea without interference of the state. Really, that's a blessing that we have. Is that the blessing that Jesus is talking about here? I don't think so. I don't think so. As you've been watching and I've been watching, these blessings seem to be pressed a little bit, to say the least, this past week. And we have seen what those rights look like in action. We've seen assemblies of people marching in Washington last Saturday and in many cities throughout our country. And we saw also a March for Life, which is not the same thing, but it's also been a long-standing tradition for many, many years, decades. Also the right of those who assemble to prove that point that they want to get across. And also we have seen last night in airports across the country, those turning out to assemble and protest actions that have been taken. I remember back when I was in high school, I was a sophomore right when the first Iraq conflict erupted. And it looked like we were going to be going to war in Kuwait. And I remember sitting in the hallway with my basketball team as our coach came out to tell us that this conflict was going to happen. And I remember some of my friends who had siblings in the armed forces weeping because they were scared. They were really terrified. And all of us unsure of what that meant for us as young men coming up. I mean, we didn't participate in the protests that happened a generation before. We weren't alive yet. But this was something that was real. And they already in a few days, the sides were marching on either side. Those who wanted to say we don't want this war or have anything to do with it, and those who were also saying we need to tie the yellow ribbon around the old oak tree. And before long, it was over so fast without forcing the issue of where people needed to pick a side. But that's a blessing. right? It's a blessing to be in a place with relative security, that when wars break out, it seems almost like an anomaly to our existence in some ways, even though it seems like we've been in perpetual war for at least 10 or 15 years now. These are the blessings of our land, right? To have these unalienable rights that we can call upon, or to have an opportunity to act on our dreams, or to be able to raise our voice when we see things that, at least in our view, are amiss, and to hold on to things like peace and security as a real thing we can achieve potentially. This is not really what Jesus is talking about here at all, is it? He's bringing a different kind of blessing when kind of everything goes wrong. He says, blessed are the poor. Actually says the poor in spirit. Blessed are the meek, those who don't have the strength to stand up for themselves. Blessed are those who mourn. It's hard to think of that as a blessing. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And even those who hunger and thirst in a real physical way, I would add probably too. Blessed are those who reach out in mercy. Blessed are those who look towards peace in a deeply divided and broken world. Blessed are those who are pure in heart, if any of us know what that might look like. And blessed are those who are persecuted. It's hard to think of that in these days as anything that's close to a blessing. And then he says, and blessed are you. He addresses it to you. Blessed are you when people hate you, when they revile you, when they make fun of you, when they mock you, when they laugh at you. All on account of me. And then he says, rejoice and be glad. What could he mean by this? What's it mean for us to be blessed by Jesus himself? I want to think about that a little bit more, but I also want to think about the people who are there listening to this for the first time. So I want to think about those who are gathered there. It's, I think, a little ambiguous, whether it's just the disciples or the whole crowd that is there, but he addresses them. I think also we can look to those who are going to be his opponents. They're not quite active yet, but they're coming. And then I want to think a little bit about those who Matthew is writing to. That these words in this gospel are put together for, that community of people of faith looking to Jesus in their lifetime, what that looks like as we think about what it means that Jesus blesses us here, now. So first, the disciples and those who gathered around him. Just think about who these folks are. You've got bumpkin fishermen. And you've got sellout tax collectors. And you've even got some zealots there who want nothing more than to kick Rome out and take it to the man, so to speak. There's a real climate in Jesus' day for revolution. There is no mistake in why Jesus is put to death on a cross. That is the punishment dished out for treason against the state, against the emperor. And it's said that in those days, the roads running into Jerusalem were lined with crosses. Jesus came speaking a different kind of message. He's not looking to raise up arms, but they must have gotten the signal of that, I think, when Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey with those palm branches waving, that this was the signal that maybe the kingdom now would be restored. And even his disciples at the Last Supper bickering over who gets to sit on the right and the left, like they want the right cabinet position when the time comes. It would have been shock, to say the least, when Jesus was arrested and taken away. They didn't think this was going to happen to their guy. And the lives that he had touched all along the way, those healed and touched. What would they think of these words of blessing? He's not looking to restore Israel in a military way. He's coming to usher in a different kind of kingdom, of lifestyle, of existence, of promise to all people in our world. And then what about his opponents? Like I said, they're not quite on the scene yet, but that's coming really quickly. They thought of Jesus as a blasphemer, that he touched the wrong people, that he hung out with the wrong people, that he disregarded their authority, that he called them hypocrites. Not a great way to win friends and influence people, but that's exactly what he did, calling them out on their own spiritual bankruptcy. I think we go there ourselves a little bit, at least I think that way. After all, we're the religious people, right? And we're living in this world and trying to make some sense of it. I think sometimes we take these words and we turn them into things that they're not. We start to measure ourselves or others against them, like there's some kind of new rule list, like blessed are the poor in spirit, were you poor enough? Or the meek, were you meek enough? Was mercy executed in the right way and shown and revealed? Was the peacemaking successful? Exactly how pure is your heart? And we start to look inward on ourselves and see our brokenness and sinfulness and the way we don't quite measure up. And then we do the other thing, I think, too, is we become those who persecute the other because we think they might not measure up to our standards. What does Jesus' blessings say to that, especially when he says to us, blessed are you, when you are hated and persecuted, reviled, mocked, laughed at, forsaken, on my account. After all, he's the one from the very cross that will say, my God, why have you forsaken me? And yet it's there he says, rejoice and be glad. What's that blessing all about? Then there is Matthew's community. The scholars believe that the people who Matthew wrote this gospel to, they were Jewish Christians living in Palestine, the Holy Land, probably after the temple was destroyed. So probably about, 30, 40 years or so after Jesus, his life, death, and resurrection took place. You had people that were listening to the stories of Jesus, who were in the community of Jesus, who were trying to serve Jesus out in the world, and the very sign of what they thought it meant to be God's blessing in the world, the temple was taken away, and the very powers that they thought to oppose had crushed them, really quite literally. And it's hard to look at the world with any kind of resolute positivity, to say the least. And yet here comes these words again. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the mourning. Blessed are the hungry. Blessed are those who are merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemaker, the persecuted, the hated. Rejoice and be glad. What might this mean for us? I think since we have the benefit of knowing the end of the story before we enter the story, we should really start there, right? We know that the cross ends with Easter. We know that new life comes, that resurrection happens, that's the promise we're actually called into living, this new life that is promised for the heaven that is yet to come, and for the reality in which we live now, that we have kind of a different way of living because we know that Christ is risen from the dead. And we should hear these words for what they are. They're blessing. They are words of blessing. Not new rules to uphold, not other standards to judge others against, but they are the very blessing of what resurrection life is all about. Second, I think we can also look at these words as if they are on the road to the cross, because we've been there. We know what that is like in our own experience, to feel like we are the poor ones, the meek ones, the mourning, the hungry, and so on. We know what that's like. We might feel a little bit what it's like to feel hated by the world, and we probably will a lot more in the days to come, I think. But thirdly, I think it's also about those around us. It's about seeing these things in our friends and neighbors and the people we've yet to meet as the exact place where Jesus is in the world. That those who are in pain and suffering are not forsaken by God or by us, But that's the place where Jesus actually offers blessing. We might think to ourselves, well, what are we supposed to do with that? Now that we have this blessing in a world that seems so divided, and the blessing we seem to count on seems to be narrowing by the day, what does that look like? I think it's there we can look to these words of the prophet who says, do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with God. And I think we can also hold to closely that the cross is something that is foolish to the eyes of the world, right? It makes no sense that God would come and live among us and die as a criminal, and yet we know that's the place that gives us our power, our strength, our faith. It's where God meets us in our pain and suffering and raises us to new life. And yet I think it is also where Matthew points later, and Jesus speaks near the end of the gospel, where he says, you know where to find me. You know where that is. It's when I'm hungry and you fed me. It's where I was naked and you clothed me. It's where I was a stranger and you welcomed me. It's when I was in prison and you came to see me. It's when I was sick and you were there at my bedside. Where was this, we ask? When you did it for the least of me, Jesus says, that's where I am. We have these powerful words of blessing in a world that continues to narrow. It is the kingdom of heaven that opens up all around us to use the gifts, to use the blessing, to use the opportunities in which we have been given, to rejoice and be glad, because the kingdom is opening for you.